Morning, my name's Gavin O'Meara. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News. Welcome to episode 5 of the Future of Work. Today is a spotlight on digital skills, something very, very close to my heart. My co-host is James from NCFE. James, I wonder if you could come and join me in the studio. Hey, James, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, really good. Everyone in the office, at home, wherever you may be, on the train, wherever you are, sort of catching this live or on catch up, we had like a sort of briefing on this on the show. We do every show. I think it was about an hour and a bit, and sort of talking about different things around the world of digital. It was very, very cool. So we're both super excited for today's show. But I mean, everything now is reliant on digital skills. Pandemic brought that home more than anything, really, didn't it? But James, what would you say? Maybe setting the scene is how important are digital skills right now, and where are the biggest skills gaps in the digital space at present, would you say?
Wow. So, I mean, you can't overstate the importance, I suppose, of digital skills. It's something that is prevalent in probably most roles. I think around about 2/3 of roles touch on digital skills, and what we're really starting to see, which is really exciting, maybe coming from a nerd perspective like myself, is that digital skills is kind of prevalent within that main area that you would identify as digital, right? So the people who do digital things, and then people who aren't ostensibly doing digital things still need the digital skills in order to enable them. So it's this kind of digital as a vehicle concept that we're seeing. This is, and I appreciate this is going to sound super nerdy, but it's such an exciting time to be involved in the digital sector. We're seeing evolution just drive us forward at such a pace. It's really cool to see. As far as the gaps, I think where are those gaps is a huge question, and it's a really important one to ask. We have to break it open, I think, into different elements. I suppose we see geographical gaps as being sort of access to technology, that kind of thing, and that's just literally a geographical issue. We've got data connectivity, also sort of speaks into that. We've got skills, which is obviously very important to us at NCFE from an education perspective, and we've got the element of digital poverty, those that maybe can't afford the equipment, the access, or any component part of it. So we see those gaps all over the place. If we just sort of take a look at skills as one element of it, I think the evolution, the speed that the digital sector moves at is sort of sometimes creating gaps, and we need to ensure that digital skills underpins everything we do. And when I say we in this context, I'm thinking specifically as obviously as NCFE, but I think as a sector, as a business community, we need to make sure that we're addressing it. So it's huge, it's everywhere, it's not going away, and I love that. I think I'm really excited.
It is, and I think it's interesting. Yeah, we've set in the sort of scene with the timing of this. We've had the white paper on leveling up, which sort of opens up. We're looking at this whole season around the future of work, and the future of work is changing, isn't it? And it's sort of digital is key for this. And I think we had National Apprenticeship Week last week to put this into context as well. But there's so many other schemes which are involved with helping people to be um, supported with their digital sort of skills ongoing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what just really briefly, so I want to bring in our guests. We've got two unbelievably cool guests. I can't wait to sort of to be chatting about different things. But what sort of education based support is there for people to be equipped for digital moving forward?
So it's important to see it maybe as a scale, right? So at one end, maybe the introduction, the starting end, are literally as a product called the essential digital skills, and that is for everyone, and that's a government commitment to say that every adult should have those essential digital skills, and we are quite literally covering the fundamentals. So it could be how to turn a computer on. It could be how to make sure you're shopping safely online, right? We always talk about that green padlock up at the top. You don't want to be putting credit card information into a website that's not secure. These are skills that everybody must have in order just to even stay safe online. But there's also, in the absence of those skills, some folks are not able to get, for example, cheaper energy tariffs, particularly poignant at the moment. So we need to make sure that everyone starts at that point, and then we go right up to those higher level qualifications where we're really looking and saying, do you want to be involved in the digital sector? Do you want to be perhaps a network engineer? Do you want to work in data? Do you want to work in cybersecurity? Really cool at the moment. And those are those higher higher level qualifications. And then in that midpoint, we've got some really cool sort of products that you'll see across the sector around getting involved in web design or getting involved in network engineering. And then there's component parts. There's a lot to come. I'm trying to be brief, but there's a bit of something for everyone is truly the way to look at it.
Yeah, no, it's digital is key for everything. Like you said, with this, we're in a strange period of the pandemic now. But during the height of it, being able to access .gov sites pretty key to be able to get COVID tests or to be able to book on to get like vaccines and things like that, through to accessing work and education. It's really, 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 really key. I want to bring in our guests. We have two amazing guests. We've got Jenny Taylor, MBE from IBM, and we've got Helen Milner, OBE from Good Things Foundation. What is interesting about both our guests is everyone would have heard of IBM, but Good Things Foundation, really interesting organisation around supporting people with, like you were saying at the beginning, entry-level sort of qualifications, how to enable everyone to be working in a digital world, but also helping with things like digital poverty and things like that. So there's loads we can cover today. Jenny, Helen, I wonder if you could come into the studio. Welcome, ladies. It's so lovely to see you both, and thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to ask and kick off straight away with a question I asked James, actually. What are the biggest skills gaps in digital space at present? Jenny, I wonder if I could kick off with you.
Okay, so from an employer perspective, there are gaps everywhere, if we're honest. So if you look at the marketplace, there's a big war for talent out there for people with digital skills, especially experienced people with digital skills, and it's moving so fast. The industry's moving so fast. Things are being invented all the time. It's pretty hard to keep up. So if you look at the war for talent at the high end, that means there's also lots and lots of opportunities at the early professionals end to build skills, and not just from an IBM perspective, from an all employer perspective. That's what employers are keen to see and are trying to facilitate in schools, with young people, and indeed people who want to reskill, because there's plenty of people out there, particularly following pandemic, who've had to change jobs or want to change jobs, and there are great opportunities out there to reskill as well. So the digital skills gap is everywhere, if we're honest.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're in the setting. It's a really interesting time to be around at the moment, isn't it? It's the great reshuffle, the great resignation, and a lot of people are moving roles with purpose. It seems to be looking at leveling up, that place doesn't seem to be so important for like 100% of your role. So now you can open up and have a wider field. I just think that's really, really interesting. Helen, I wonder if I could ask you, where do you see right now the biggest sort of digital skills gaps in the digital space at present?
Well, as you said, Good Things Foundation, we're a digital inclusion charity working across the UK. So I'm definitely going to focus on that bottom end. Our mission is to fix the digital divide in the UK. So there's 10 million people in this country who lack those very foundation skills, which means that they're not literate in today's society. They can't function in today's society, and some of those are offline. You mentioned the digital poverty piece as well. So we mustn't forget that there are 2 million households who don't have the internet because they can't afford it. And also, a bit like James has said, that we really need to make sure, even in the digital inclusion exclusion place, we don't think of this as binary. That we come across plenty of young people, for example, who have a smartphone but can only afford data for half of the month. So they could be a student and they do have the wherewithal to do it, but they just don't have the money to be able to pay for that data. Of that 10 million people who lack the foundation skills, 2.4 million of them are in the workplace today, right? So we have 2.4 million workers who can't send an email, can't log on to Wi-Fi, can't put an attachment on an email. Some of them can't even use devices. The good news is, if there is any good news from the pandemic, is that actually of workers, a huge number have actually gained significant digital skills during the pandemic. There's 6.2 million people within the workforce actually went from not having essential digital skills for work to having essential digital skills for work. So that necessity really did drive that. But I always feel that it means that, classically, as the divide narrows, it deepens. And it's really important to understand that although the people who lack those essential digital skills, who lack that access, are typically older and poorer, is almost 40% of the people who are offline are under the age of 60. Right? So this is not something, this is still something that absolutely bites hard into the current UK workforce and to future UK workforces as well.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, isn't it? Like, because the pandemic, I'm always trying to see that silver line of what's been a rubbish time. Do you know what I mean? It's been like, really weird time. It's been really horrific for so many people with real tragic sort of health consequences, mental health consequences and stuff like that. I've got 4 kids. It's been a weird education time for them. And it's just like, but we're opening things up with like more and more people, like you said, Helen, with access. And that's a good thing, but there's so many more to go, several million more to go. Jenny, how have you found the pandemic with, I'm thinking of levelling up and people be able to access from different, parts of the country to be able to, to be IBMers around the country, around the world. But as Helen said, there's some people who, connectivity has been an issue. Obviously, IBM will be able to fix that for people, but it's also their space. Like all of us looking here have got like beautiful space around them, but some people don't. So how can we sort of progress things with the future of work and connectivity around digital, but also have that digital divide in sort of mind around the future of work as well?
Yeah, and we've had to look after our early professionals during the pandemic, very specifically around those points. Everyone's obviously been working at home, wherever that might be. And it might not be home. It might be in a 1-bedroom flat where they're really, they're absolutely on their own. It might be with a large family, but then space is an issue. And there's nowhere for them to work or do a meeting privately. There might be internet connections, absolutely. So we've tried to facilitate. We have had some people actually in the office, even though the office has been closed. We've had special permission to get them in so that they can work. And we've had to keep a special eye on it. And it's not easy, because, of course, all communication relies on connectivity and instead of face-to-face, and it's much easier to get to the bottom. Sometimes people don't want to admit these things. And that, again, is difficult. You have to be really sensitive. But we've also continued to run a program for disadvantaged young people through Movement to Work, and we continue to run that online. And the various organisations we work with were able to provide, the technology for people to access it, and it's been really successful. Even though it's a cut down version, we've still been able to give people employability skills and a few basic digital skills. But access is an issue, and we are always cognizant of that in our recruitment process. So we don't, for example, have super techie online assessment centres. We keep it as basic as we possibly can. So there's no, things where you need high bandwidth or anything like that. It's really, really basic connectivity. And that's very important because we're very committed to inclusivity at all levels. So levelling up is a key focus for us. Yes.
That's interesting as well. It's a lot of this is if you're thinking of data and like how data hungry some sort of devices are. It's all by user experience and design, isn't it? If you know what I mean. So I think that's really interesting. You could I've had a couple of comments. Kelly has dropped in and reminded me of Mark Dorr, who wrote a really interesting piece last month around digital skills being the fourth functional skill, most popular article that week actually. And Janet has come in to follow up on what you was mentioning there as well, Helen, around over 60s and digital inclusion programs. That's really, really interesting. So so much more needs to be done. James, I wonder if I could hand over, or maybe bring you in on what solutions are available. It's interesting because you've got a heart for digital and creative, do you know what I mean? But also, you work in an education charity and also an awarding organisation, right? What solutions are there to help people with these digital skills gaps, really?
So, I mean, within the education sector, obviously, we talked about those essential digital skills, so the literal qualification, and it's great to hear from both Jenny and Helen about what their organisations are doing. There's lots of help out there for people who at least can acknowledge that there's a gap for themselves, and that's, for some people, really easy to identify. For some people, it's not, and so we need to be more proactive. We need to reach out and sometimes it's about making that connection. It's not always possible to speak directly to the individual. You need to maybe speak to family members, but the education is and I appreciate that I'm coming out this, like say, from an education charity perspective, but education in the broader sense is key here, right? Because it's critical to help people understand why digital is so important. And really at this point, we're probably just talking about digital sort of as a horizontal rather than digital as a vertical, right? So it's the digital skills that spread and are needed. So like mentioned right at the beginning, if you can't get online, if you don't know how to do it, then how can you order your shopping? Now, 3 years ago, that probably wasn't an issue. And then something happened and you could only get shopping if you could order online. So we had to be reactive to that situation, and that was really important at that time. And even working from home, right through to maybe what we might consider to be a luxury of getting your TV, for example, online. These are all things that are less so TV, but considered necessary, critical. And I agree with that perspective of the 4 functional skills. In fact, internally at NCFE, our digital skills is considered functional and then it's looked after by our functional team. So it can absolutely stand behind that. That education component is absolutely critical, and it's only getting more important.
Yeah, no, definitely. Can we talk about digital divide in a little bit more, because this is interesting, because Helen, with what you do for like your charity, but Jenny as well as a really large employer, digital divide is interesting. Is there areas that we need to be thinking around with skills gaps, with age, gender, with sort of thinking around how we're being inclusive with digital? Because Helen, it looks, I can tell you want to jump in with that one.
Well, first of all, the 6+ million workers who developed more digital skills during the pandemic were typically men and younger. So women, particularly in the age group of 50+, were much less likely to develop those digital skills. So I think that's really important, and I think it's good that you raised that. I think the big thing is that obviously nobody here, that we all know that the digital divide exists, but for most people designing most curriculum or programs or policymakers really are in a bit of a denial about how bad it is. That quite often I will hear people go, "Oh, everyone's got a smartphone. Everybody knows how to do this. Just ask a young person; they'll be fine." And actually, that is so far from the truth. That I pre-pandemic, this was in one of our local community partners. So we work with thousands of community partners right across the UK, which is how we reach those people who are furthest away from digital skills. And of 13 of them, only 3 had a mobile phone, and only 1 of those was a smartphone. So this is just 2 years ago. And only 1 of them had access to that she had a laptop, but none of them had a tablet or a laptop or a PC at home. So of 13 people, there were 10 of them who didn't even have the most basic mobile phone. And I think that it's so hard when you're not out in the community meeting people to actually understand how fundamental that is. So the essential digital skills entitlement, which is fantastic, like digital skills has been put on the same footing as maths and English, so it's now an entitlement, which is really terrific. But actually there are so many people who are still not ready for that level. And those 10 million people are at that foundation level. So we're working in Greater Manchester, West Midlands and north of Tyne at the moment on I call it a pipeline, we're calling it a learning pathway, I believe, to actually work in the community, in those combined authority areas with Learn My Way, that's our online learning platform, which is free for everybody, with the national data bank that is bringing in free data for them, so they don't have to pay for their connectivity, but also fundamentally with those community partners deep in the community, so they're reaching the furthest behind. But then we're partnering with further education colleges and adult community learning who are delivering the qualification to create an explicit pipeline from the community to the qualification. We see most people, I think, definitely in the further education sector, will probably be thinking that the essential digital skills is the lowest rung of that ladder. But what I'm saying is there are many rungs below that as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jenny, I'd really like to bring you in, because IBM, global brand, really large employer in the UK, but also globally. From an employer perspective, with this season around the future of work, what do you see the digital skills gaps to be for you? And what, you've got, met the Queen royalty, or to get your MBE as Helen has with OBE. This is really interesting. You both got like both ends of this, but where do you see the digital skills gaps? Because me as an employer in digital publishing, massive, digital skills gap, huge. But how do you see it at IBM?
Well, I think we recognise this through our corporate social responsibility policies. So IBM recently committed globally to skill 30 million people by 2030. That's a lot of people globally. And that's through some of our programs such as Skills Build, which are free, completely free. Anybody can do it. And that builds basic digital skills, gives you digital accreditations badges, which you can then take to an employer, for example. So we're very conscious of it. I say from corporate social responsibility as well as an employer point of view, and in that we need more digitally educated people in our business. But I would say also, I'm an early professionals manager, and my MBE was for my work with apprenticeships, that apprenticeships are the key. They are absolutely the key. So we recommend an apprenticeship to anyone and everyone, whatever age they are, whether they're straight from school or whether they're mid-career and they need to reskill. Because the thing about apprenticeships, and we're on FE News, so I think I'm speaking to the converted here, is the on-the-job element of apprenticeships, 80% on the job. And that means that you are learning the relevant skills from day one. Whatever those relevant skills might be. And of course, in digital, they are changing, I would say, almost by the day. So it doesn't mean that you have to develop qualifications and change a curriculum every 5 minutes, because apprenticeship standards are wide ranging, and you can choose one that meets your needs, and that will fit even if technology changes, because they're written in such a way that they're not so specific. So yeah, apprenticeships, and even more apprenticeships, but that's still a story that needs to get out to the schools of this country, and people need to stop thinking about them as sort of second class and people only doing manual things, and all those sorts of stories which go around with parents and careers advisors and all of those things. For me, apprenticeships are the number one choice. So I would recommend an apprenticeship now, and bearing in mind I started as a graduate employer manager, I would recommend that above going to university, unless you want to go to university for a specific academic purpose.
Thinking about schools, though, Jenny, I'd like to bring in. I 100% agree. You are completely talking to the converted. For schools is interesting. This had National Apprenticeship Week. Entry routes in for digital. So Helen's covered sort of like the before we sort of come into to people that have maybe, you know, a little bit sort of after sort of school age and stuff like that. But for schools, you know, do you still think there needs to be some work done around things like T levels? They are new and they did launch during the pandemic, which wasn't the greatest timing for it. But yeah, it does seem a really interesting route for T levels. Yeah, the traineeships. There's so many new schemes that are going on. How have you sort of found those as an employer? Yeah, with IBM.
Yeah, well, we did make a major contribution to the development of T levels in the first place, and we have been piloting T levels in a small way because, of course, the pandemic has meant that we can't have people in the office to do the work experience. But we still managed to do some online T-level type work, which is great. So they are key, yes. But I'd also say that, you know, a level 3 apprenticeship, you don't necessarily need to have had any technical education before. Well, you don't, because we can train you. Level 3 and level 4, actually, we can train you from scratch because it is the on-the-job day-to-day work that is the training. It's not necessarily academic type training. So yeah.
Which is the thing you don't get with university, isn't it? You know, you're able to write really good essays and reports, but unless you do that for a job, then, you know, what's the...
Well, we still have to train graduates. You know, we recruit graduates. Obviously, we do a blended mix, but we still have to train them in the same way as we train apprentices. So why wouldn't you start earlier, straight from school, and get those skills at 18, 19 years old? And then you'll find your trajectory in the workplace goes poof. And graduates, having had, you know, the benefit of a university education, which is great, of course, still have to start at that same point effectively on the job, because they don't, that you can't replicate that at university. So
yeah. No, definitely. We nearly getting out of time. Like, James, you want to jump in?
Just pick up on a really important point there that I absolutely agree. I think the qualifications that a young person or any student does, you know, it needs to be a route to employment ultimately, right? And so, you know, whether they go A levels, T levels, apprenticeship, whether they go into higher education, whether they're going to work, it's got to be the right path for them. And I absolutely agree. I think apprenticeships are brilliant. The same apprenticeship standards underpin the T levels. So obviously, just I work specifically on the digital business service and the digital support services T levels. So it's all about preparation for work. And so we do a lot of work with providers to make sure that the students, whichever pathway they go, it's chosen for them. And I think one of the really cool things in simplicity about T levels is it kind of flips that apprenticeship model. So instead of being 80-20, it's 20-80 on the T levels. So you're still getting that industry placement that Jenny mentioned, the work experience, but they're also getting a lot of theory as well. So it's right for some students. Apprenticeships are right for some students. University is right for some students, and it's working with providers to understand how they communicate that difference to students. So ultimately, we get the students into the workplace as quickly but efficiently as possible. So not just speed, but like getting them to where they want to be. So that's certainly what we focus on for our qualifications. It's about routes to work, routes to the workforce.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, Helen would be, you know, able to explain all sorts of things around what we could do with adults with continual learning. We're out of time. I want to ask one more. I had about 15 more questions. One of them could have been about 3 hours we're going to talk about anyway. But with every one of these episodes, we've always asked questions. If you could dream big, what would you want to see for the future of work and digital? Helen, what would you want to see?
Well, obviously, I want to fix the digital divide once and for all. We definitely can do it. We know how to do it. We just need to put our back into it. And as part of that, we want there to be a place in every community, town and city where people can get help to use the internet. We already work with thousands, but we want to work with thousands more. So actually growing that network. So if anyone's listening and wants to join the network at Good Things Foundation, then please do come along for the ride and help us to fix that digital divide.
Thank you, Helen. Jenny, what would you want to see? If you could dream big for the future of work and digital, what would you want to see?
Well, it's everything that Helen said, isn't it? It's accessibility for everybody and equal opportunity for everybody, because that's what employers want. There are brilliant people out there in every city, town, village in this country, and we want to reach them. The difficulty is always in reaching them.
Yeah, no, definitely. James, what would you want to see?
I mean, the temptation to say a quantum computer in every home is overwhelming, but I suppose really sort of echoing what Helen and Jenny have said, I think is the arguably much more important thing. I think those where we've identified those gaps, those digital skills barriers, the solution seems so unbelievably simple at times, where we can just say, well, if you haven't got equipment, then why can't we partner with someone just to get some equipment? If it's connectivity, let's just put the connectivity in. If it's skills, let's teach people how to do it. As a society, these are really should be simple barriers. So I think that would be my magic wand, just to say, let's just get it done.
Yeah, no, that's really, really cool. We're out of time. For me, if I was to dream big and go over because I can, I think it's both things really. I think it's getting those foundational sort of skills ready for people that are in school now, because not everyone who's in school is naturally good at digital skills, and to build and to have, so as we can have those foundations in place so people can upskill, reskill, and continue. Digital, like you said, James, right at the very get-go, isn't going away. It's very much here. I don't see the rise of analog and the drop of digital, put it that way. And at the same time, I think for helping adults to be able to then have that continual sort of development opportunities to be able to help those with access, be that those didn't have a good experience at school, how do we open that up? I think it's interesting. There's so many different ways we could go with this. I mean, this could be like a whole day sort of chat, really. But I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, audience, for getting involved. Thank you, Janet, for dropping in the point about how are you helping people, 60 plus, which is brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is a total, collaboration between FE News and NCFE. So James, thank you for hosting this with me today. Sam, thank you so much for putting this all together. Lindsay, Team FE News, Leah, thank you. Finley, Kelly, thank you so much, everyone, for bringing this and putting this all together. See you next week for the last episode in the season. It's gone so fast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today when we're exploring all things digital, and hopefully that's inspired you and wanted you to sort of look to new things to do in the future, and we'll see you really soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.